The moment Jasmine Crockett spoke, the entire chamber snapped into a frozen silence, as if every molecule of air paused to listen. Cameras flashed like lightning strikes. Reporters pressed forward, and lawmakers jolted upright in their seats. Crockett didn't raise her voice, didn't lean into the microphone. She simply released a single line so sharp, so precise, it sliced through the room like a blade, a revelation tied directly to MTG's sudden, suspicious resignation. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the reaction hit all at once, an eruption of shock powerful enough to shake the walls. Gasps rippled across the committee bench. Staffers exchanged frantic glances. Journalists scrambled over each other to capture every angle of MTG's reaction. Phones shot skyward, screens glowing as live streams exploded online. In the center of it all, Crockett remained perfectly still, calm, grounded, eyes fixed on MTG with a quiet certainty that suggested she had known this moment was coming. MTG, meanwhile, looked as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Her face drained of color, her jaw trembled, and her eyes darted wildly across the room in search of an escape that simply did not exist. For once, the woman known for shouting over colleagues and steamrolling hearings had nothing, no quip, no insult, no deflection. Only silence. Whispers erupted behind her. Is it true? Did she really just say that? Is this why she resigned? The murmurs spread like wildfire, feeding the frenzy as reporters fired off rapid questions, desperate for context, confirmation, anything that could explain the bomb Crockett had just dropped. Yet Crockett offered no follow-up, no elaboration, no dramatic flourish. She simply folded her hands, her expression steady, as though the truth itself was enough. And in that moment, every camera, every witness, every person watching from their living room felt the shift, felt the weight of something much bigger than political theater. Outside the chamber, crowds that had gathered for an ordinary hearing suddenly found themselves swept into a storm of speculation. Messages pinged across the country as viewers replayed the clip, searching for every hidden implication and urgency. But nobody, absolutely nobody, expected what this revelation would cause just hours later. The truth is, this explosion didn't come out of nowhere. Washington had been simmering for weeks, and everyone who worked on Capitol Hill could feel the pressure building long before Jasmine Crockett delivered her devastating line. MTG had been unraveling in slow, public motion, each committee hearing a little more chaotic than the last, each interview a little more unhinged. Her outbursts weren't just loud, they were reckless. She cut off colleagues mid-sentence, hurled personal insults, and seemed increasingly desperate to provoke conflict. What once came off as political theater had begun to look like something darker, a woman on the edge of losing control. On top of that, a string of scandals had begun circling her like vultures, whispers of misuse of office funds, questionable communications, and a sudden spike in closed-door meetings that only fueled suspicion. House members from both parties had grown visibly tense around her. Some avoided her altogether. Others whispered warnings to new staffers to stay clear when she gets riled up. The hallways felt charged, almost electric, every time she walked by. Jasmine Crockett, unfortunately, had become one of her favorite targets. Week after week, MTG singled her out with dog whistle comments masked as policy disagreements. She mocked Crockett's background, her tone, her intelligence, even her identity, lining her attacks with a kind of coded language that progressive and immigrant communities recognized instantly. And while Crockett remained poised on the surface, those who knew her could see the toll of being constantly baited by someone determined to strip her dignity. By the morning of the hearing, tensions were already thick enough to taste. Staffers exchanged uneasy glances as they set up briefing folders. Security hovered closer than they normally would for a routine committee session, quietly bracing for another unpredictable scene. Journalists arrived early, whispering that they expected today to produce yet another MTG meltdown, the kind that would light up social media for days. They didn't know how right they were, but for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett walked into the room with a calm so deliberate it stood out against the storm around her. She sat down, reviewed her notes, and waited, not with fear, not with anger, but with the steady confidence of someone who had studied every detail, prepared every angle, and understood exactly what was coming. Yet even in that tense atmosphere, even with all the build-up, even with everyone sensing the volatility of the moment, none of them knew the truth. Jasmine wasn't just ready for a clash. She had brought something with her. Something precise. Something devastating. But what Jasmine had prepared was something no one on Capitol Hill was ready for. To understand why Jasmine Crockett's bombshell hit with such force, you have to rewind to the rise of MTG, a rise built not on achievement or policy, but on spectacle. She didn't climb her way into national influence through thoughtful legislation or meaningful bipartisan work. She became a household name because outrage paid better. Viral clips of her yelling in hallways, confronting colleagues, and spinning conspiracy theories rocketed across the internet, each one boosting her notoriety. What others saw as shameful, she spun into currency. In a political ecosystem thirsty for drama, she became the lightning rod, the chaos queen, the figure people clicked on because they couldn't look away. But beneath that manufactured bravado was a long, sprawling record of inflammatory remarks that never truly faded. Comments attacking immigrants, mocking marginalized communities, trivializing tragedies, each one etched a deeper fissure between her and the colleagues who once tolerated her. At first, lawmakers chalked the behavior up to inexperience or attention-seeking. But as ethics complaints accumulated, one for misuse of funds, another for suspicious donor interactions, another for hostile conduct toward staff, the cracks became too large to ignore. She wasn't just abrasive, she was spiraling. Inside the Capitol, the distancing began. Quietly at first, averted eyes in the hallway, lunch tables that used to include her suddenly full, invitations that mysteriously never reached her desk. Even some of her strongest allies began stepping back, whispering to reporters of the record that she was becoming unpredictable, emotionally volatile, or simply too much. What had once been her power, her willingness to scorch everything in her path, was now the very thing isolating her. And yet, publicly, MTG doubled down. She strutted into hearings with manufactured confidence, armed with insults she delivered like weapons. She interrupted, overpowered, demeaned, believing that dominance equaled relevance. But behind the curtain, aides describe a different picture, a woman pacing her office late at night, voice shaking as she tried to micromanage crises that seemed to multiply by the day. Every scandal she tried to shout her way through only spawned two more. The mask of strength held, but barely. Her behavior grew more erratic as whispers of a deeper problem spread. Sudden disappearances from planned events. Closed-door meetings she refused to explain. Frantic calls to staff demanding loyalty tests. A refusal to answer basic questions from reporters who once hung on her every word. Rumors swirled that something was coming, something big enough to threaten her entire career. The harder she fought to maintain relevance, the more obvious her desperation became. And it was that desperation, raw, frantic, barely concealed, that transformed MTG from a political spectacle into a looming liability for her own party. Her colleagues saw it, the press saw it, and Jasmine Crockett, sharper and calmer than anyone else in the room, saw it more clearly than anyone. Because behind every reckless outburst, behind every attempt to bully her way through hearings, behind every trembling rant about witch hunts and persecution, Crockett recognized the truth MTG feared most. The illusion of control was slipping away. And that desperation was exactly what Crockett would expose with one devastating line. Before Jasmine Crockett ever set foot in Congress, her story had already begun, far from the marble halls of Washington. It began in neighborhoods where people were told their voices didn't matter, where families fought every day just to be seen, where justice felt like a privilege instead of a right. Jasmine saw that reality up close. She watched friends lose opportunities they deserved. She watched neighbors ignored by the same institutions meant to protect them. And even as a teenager, she made herself a quiet promise. If nobody else will fight for them, I will. That promise carried her through every struggle that followed. She worked her way through school, not with the luxury of connections or political family money, but with relentless determination. While others had doors open for them, Jasmine had to break Hayes down. Law school wasn't just a career path for her. It was a mission. She studied late into the night, fueled not by ambition alone, but by outrage at how many people suffered simply because the system never expected them to win. When she finally became a civil rights attorney, she went exactly where others hesitated to go, representing those who had been ignored, dismissed, or pushed aside. She walked into courtrooms where odds were stacked cruelly against her clients. She faced judges who underestimated her, opposing counsels who tried to intimidate her. police departments who underestimated her resolve. And every single time, Jasmine came back stronger, sharper, more unshakable. Because she wasn't fighting for cases. She was fighting for people. Those years shaped her, refining a mind that could cut through political games in seconds, and building a backbone that couldn't be bent even by the most vicious attacks. Jasmine Crockett didn't gain her reputation through shouting matches or theatrics. She gained it through control, through precision, through an almost intimidating level of calm when chaos erupted around her. And that calm became her trademark on Capitol Hill. When she entered Congress, she didn't come to play the usual Washington games. She came to confront systems that had failed her community for generations. And that meant she was bound to clash with those who thrived on noise instead of solutions, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Over the months, Crockett found herself repeatedly targeted by MTG's insults, dog whistles, and condescending attacks. MTG would lean back in her chair, smike, drop a jab, and expect Crockett to fold or lash out. But Jasmine didn't. She never did. Instead, she learned, analyzed, and understood exactly what she was up against. Because Jasmine Crockett knew something critical that her opponents didn't. Bullies only get louder when they start losing control. And Jasmine had seen that type before. In courtrooms where aggressive behavior was a mask for fear, in institutions where loudness was a substitute for competence, in political arenas where chaos was a strategy for those who had nothing meaningful to offer. So she watched MTG carefully. She saw the pattern. She saw the desperation. She saw the unraveling. And she started connecting dots that others brushed aside. Jasmine Crockett didn't just hear MTG's insults. She recognized what they were hiding. She didn't just see the outbursts. She saw the cracks forming beneath them. She began piecing together something that no one else in that chamber had fully realized yet. A truth so explosive that once spoken, it would shake the room. And that's exactly why Jasmine didn't just see MTG's behavior. She saw something far more dangerous lurking beneath it. The tension in the chamber was already simmering when the gavel struck, but the moment the floor opened, it didn't take long for Marjorie Taylor Greene to ignite the fire. She leaned forward with that familiar smake, the one that always signaled she was about to throw a jab she thought was clever. With a condescending tone dripping off every word, she took her shot at Jasmine Crockett, a dig disguised as a question. A barb wrapped in faux professionalism. A jab meant to provoke. Everyone in the room recognized a move, MTG's signature opening. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't shift in her chair, didn't even raise her voice. She simply corrected MTG with surgical precision. Her tone was steady, controlled, almost unnervingly calm. The kind of calm that made everyone else straighten up, sensing the beginning of something bigger. And MTG hated that. The moment Crockett didn't take the bait, MTG escalated. She pushed harder, moving from sarcasm to sharp insults, from mischaracterized to those subtle dog whistle jabs she thought nobody noticed. Her voice grew louder, her gestures wider. Papers slapped against the table. Theatrics replaced substance in a matter of seconds. Crockett still refused to rise to it. Instead, she delivered a warning, not emotional, not heated, but measured. If you want to go down this road, Congresswoman, I promise you I will respond in kind. That line punched through the chamber like a sudden drop in temperature. Committee members glanced at one another, shifting in their seats. A few leaned back, readying themselves for impact. Others lowered their eyes, pretending to read notes that suddenly felt irrelevant. Even those usually aligned with MTG grew uneasy, sensing she was about to push the wrong person too far. The cameras knew exactly when to zoom in. Lenses tightened on the two women like they were capturing a heavyweight fight about to break into the decisive round. Sound engineers leaned forward. Journalists perked up in their seats. Everyone felt the static in the air, the kind of electricity that signals a political moment about to make headlines. In the gallery, reaction spread like a wave. Whispering rippled across the seats. Staffers shot side-eyes at each other. A few covered their mouths in anticipation of something explosive. And then came the phones, dozens of them, sliding up quietly as people began recording what they instinctively knew would become viral history. MTG kept digging, louder and more unhinged with each word. But Crockett, she stayed steady. Still, focused. her hands folded neatly in front of her, eyes locked on MTG with a calm that felt more dangerous than any Ray's voice. And then, slowly, very slowly, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. The room froze. Conversation stopped mid-whisper. Journalists held their breath. Even MTG paused, sensing something had shifted, something she wasn't prepared for. Crockett's voice dropped, low and deliberate, slicing through the tension like a blade. And that's when Crockett leaned forward and delivered the question that would turn Congress upside down. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam her notes onto the table. She simply leaned forward, her calm intensity radiating through the chamber, and asked the first question, quiet, deliberate, precise. "Congresswoman Green," she began, her eyes locked on MTG, "can you explain this document detailing financial transactions linked to your recent committee activities?" MTG froze. A brief, almost imperceptible flicker of panic crossed her face. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of the table, voice caught mid-thought. She stumbled through an explanation, but it lacked coherence, full of half-statements and vague denials. Every word she spoke seemed to tighten the tension in the room, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Crockett leaned in a fraction closer, unflinching. "I'll ask again," she said, her tone unwavering. "Can you explain this financial document?" The repetition was surgical, almost cruel in its precision, and it left MTG with no room to maneuver. Silence filled the chamber. Even the murmurs of staffers and aides dissolved into the air, replaced by the palpable weight of anticipation. And then came the reveal. Crockett slid a folder across the table, letting the papers fall just slightly open for everyone to see. She revealed a previously unseen communication, an internal memo, a correspondence that linked MTG's resignation to undisclosed actions that contradicted every claim she had made publicly. The connection was undeniable. The room gasped. The air seemed to crackle with collective shock. Cameras zoomed in as lawmakers leaned forward, mouths agape. MTG's carefully constructed facade began to unravel in real time. Her hands shook visibly as she tried to regain control. Her eyes darted around the chamber, breaking contact with Crockett's steady gaze. Her voice cracked, trying to spin blame onto aides and staffers, but the explanation fell flat. Every whispered excuse was met with skeptical frowns and the rising murmurs of disbelief. The cracks had become chasms. MTG's posture faltered. The poise she relied on for so long had evaporated. Meanwhile, the chamber reacted. Lawmakers froze in stunned silence. Reporters reached for their phones, frantic to capture every angle of the exchange. The room seemed to pulse with a collective heartbeat as the news began to leak, even before official records were released. On social media, Twitter and X feeds erupted, hashtags trending, clips looping endlessly, viewers nationwide watching the slow dismantling of a once powerful figure. The energy in the room felt almost tangible, electric, like the tension could snap at any moment. And then, with the same calm, deliberate composure that had defined the moment from the start, Crockett asked the final, quiet question. Her voice was low, steady, and utterly devastating. "Is that why you suddenly resigned?" The room erupted. Phones captured every second, cameras panned in chaotic sweeps, and journalists scrambled to transcribe the moment before it disappeared. Colleagues whispered in disbelief. MTG's face was a study in shock and humiliation, a veneer of power completely stripped away in an instant. But the chamber's shock, as complete as it was only the beginning. Outside those walls, the ripple effect had already begun. News networks were circling the clip. Social media was ignited. Commentators were drafting their hot takes before MTG even left the hearing room. And in that instant, every person present, and millions watching across the country, felt it. This wasn't just a political confrontation. It was a reckoning. But if the bombshell shocked the chamber, the aftermath would shake the entire country. The moment Crockett's question landed, the explosion didn't stay confined to the chamber. Hashtags surged instantly across every platform. #Crockett exposes MTG trending within minutes, clipping the moment into bite-sized viral gold. Memes began to spread, turning MTG's stunned silence into shorthand for political collapse, while TikTok users edited every frame of the confrontation into replayable, shareable drama. Every swipe, every click, amplified the reach of Crockett's quiet authority. Late-night host wasted no time. Monologues opened with a clip, dissecting MTG's reactions, praising Crockett's composure, and framing the moment as more than politics, a lesson in accountability. News panels speculated wildly on what the document meant, what it revealed about MTG's sudden resignation, and how it would reshape the power dynamics in Congress. Meanwhile, MTG went dark online, deleting posts, avoiding the media, leaving millions to speculate on her next move. Every silence from her social channels only fueled the fire. Leaks began surfacing, emails, messages, internal memos, each new piece adding context to Crockett's revelation. Calls for formal investigation started rising, both from political opponents and allies who could no longer ignore the pattern of behavior. The story was no longer a single hearing. It had become a national conversation, a reckoning in real time. Across social media, the audience responded with validation. Threads celebrated Crockett's calm brilliance. Comment sections filled with cheers, affirmations, and admiration for her courage. TikTok edits, replays, and analyses multiplied, turning viewers into participants in the unfolding narrative. And just when America thought the story was over, the final twist hit.